So tell me more about what that really means, social learning, and why people who do have autism, and even maybe there's a broader category, because I want guys who are listening to this episode not to tune out and think like, oh, that's not me, right? Because it actually could potentially be them. So I'd love to hear more about maybe an explanation of who this advice and who social foundations would be helpful for, but then also explaining more about how this can potentially help all the men that are listening, because learning social information is helpful for every man out there.
Right. Absolutely. Well, effective communication is really kind of the single most important thing in a relationship. Right.
Mhm.
So, you're listening to this podcast either because you're a person with autism and you struggle finding relationships, or you're someone who struggles in general with social communication and relationships, but you don't really know why. And so you might think that there's kind of something more to it. So that's kind of, I mean, like I was saying, social communication, is so fundamental to dating, to relationships. And it's generally one of the most profound difficulties that people on the spectrum have. And that's why dating and relationships is so hard. And so that's kind of, for people with ASD, it's ASD is autism spectrum disorder. So that, and autism is a range. So that's why they call it a spectrum. So there are different levels of autism, from people who are pretty effective and have, incredible difficulties with language, to people who are actually very highly verbal and have great, verbal IQ, but struggle with communicating socially. And I will say that many people who have autism or who have autism spectrum disorder are highly, highly intellectual and very, very smart. But there's a big disconnect between intelligence and social cognition. They often live in very mutually exclusive spheres for people on the spectrum. And social cognition is how we kind of process and respond to social information in our environment. So, how we kind of work with, any kind of relationship really is all about, how we communicate. So, I would say that generally, even though every person on the spectrum is very, very different and present very differently, I would say that sort of the connecting factor is usually that difficulty with social language and social communication.